Hey Internet, it's RJ. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning into the show today. Now today's episode, we're taking a look at banking competition. Over the past few years, it seems like some of the once most competitive, most dominant banks in the credit card space, like the House of Diamond and Chase, have almost taken a knee and stopped competing. Well, others like PNC out of nowhere have come up and tried to challenge those like Bank of America and others. So what's driving this all? It's the reason behind it, and of course, how can we profit? So of course, if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead, press the subscribe button, and let's get to work. Now, we'll focus on, the top banks mostly for this, but when you take a look at it, I'm someone I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I've been doing credit cards, before being on TV, since I think my first Freedom card was dated like 2013. And back then, I was so proud to have 5 Chase Freedom cards, a few Freedom Flexes, and a few OG Freedoms. But I don't really use them anymore. I don't really use Chase cards anymore. I use the Amazon card. I use the Ink Cash card. And even then, I could replace the Ink Cash card. I just, if we're talking 5% cell phone and internet, I have it, might as well use it. The point being, there was a time in this game where Chase was, the Yankees or the Dodgers, and that's all anyone talked about, myself included, of 524, living in fear of it, getting all their cards, this, that, and the other. But that is clearly no longer the case. So, the obvious answer, why doesn't Chase compete anymore? I think there's the obvious answer, well, they're so big they don't have to, which is true. They're the biggest bank in the country, and I think they're the 5th biggest in the world. People line up to give them their money with or without intro offers. Intro offers always help, but they're not hurting, right? And so if we take something like the Freedom Unlimited, that's been a 1.5x base card, everyone wants it to be 2%, and it's just not going to happen. The answer is, part of the answer is, I don't have to give you 2% if everyone's already showing up for 1.5%. The card does other things, but again, 1.5 is the sticking point, really. But if we left it at that answer, I wouldn't have anything to talk about and I'd be out of a job. So the other part of this, and I don't think we give them, I don't want to say enough credit for, but I believe it was MKBHD, super famous tech YouTuber, and he was talking about Google and YouTube, and he said they're so big that all the problems they have become problems at scale. And I think that's part of it with Chase. So yes, I don't have to compete, but at the same time, I have so many customers, presumably I'm selling a lot of Freedom Unlimited. I don't know if they publish the number specifically of how many each product they're selling or is in circulation. But if I gave that many people an extra 0.5%, that would become a problem. A problem in the sense that, no, they're not going to go broke. Diamond's still going to be able to do okay. But, they're still beholden to shareholders and, giving everyone 5%. Because, again, people who have no money like free products, but people with tons of money and spend tons of money might not care about these travel cards, the expensive cards, and also just be using a Freedom Unlimited. So an extra 0.5% might actually be a problem for Chase that they can't just wave their hand and do. I understand, yes, they could do it, and yes, they could afford it, but I think you get my point from the business savvy of it, right? So I do believe if we look at Chase, we could say, maybe not even by a bank, but by a product line, that might be a problem at scale. Conversely, if you look at the Sapphire line, when it first came out, the Sapphire Reserve and the initial 100K offer, and that kind of jump-started credit card YouTube, I want to say. And the famous line of I wish I could lose more money on the card. And that was cool because they had a plan, and eventually they lost enough money on the card, and now 10 years later, we're at the Sapphire Reserve that we have today. That's $700 loaded with coupons, and a lot less useful to people like us than it was. And there's been publishings, one of the major publications, I think it was 1 Mile at a Time, it was way back when they refreshed it. But long story short, Chase said we now have too many people spending only in the categories, the 3x travel or whatever it was, right? We need people spending on more non-category spend. So things can start out small and you're trying to build them up, and eventually they get to where they're at, and now you have a problem at scale, and then you go ahead and totally kneecap it, so we would say, and then move on. So all that to say, we'll go through the other banks really quickly, because I think it is an interesting exercise. And then we'll also land on PNC, who kind of got me thinking about this as well. Because we'll just stick to the top guys. If you look at Bank of America, Same thing kind of holds true. They've never, I mean, they're the second biggest bank, right? But I always look at Bank of America as kind of like out there on their own, doing their own thing. Like, yeah, they're not the size of Chase, but I don't know that they really care from a credit card standpoint, right? Because they've been doing preferred rewards. Well, preferred rewards lasted about 14 years in its current iteration before they said, hey, this is now a problem at scale. We have to devalue it significantly. Well, the rates still work, but the money to get to the top went from 100,000 to a million, which is quite a devaluation. The rewards didn't necessarily increase. You're talking to a Bank of America faithful. So, I'd put Bank of America right there next to Chase. And they also, surprise, don't have a 2% card. They have a base 1.5x card. Not a need for it. Citi, another interesting one. Citi was basically tanking this entire time. If you follow the NBA, that's been a hot topic over the last, few months as we get closer to the draft and playoffs and things like that. But Citi, I think Golden Citi in credit card speak was the original Citi Prestige, and then it kind of went downhill from there. They didn't have it for a while. And then, they relaunched the Premier into the Strata Premier, but didn't really change much. They did add insurances. And now all of a sudden, which is still a really good card, in my opinion, for the price, we've got surveys out now. They're like, hey, what if we hike the fee by $100, reduce these multipliers here, and offered you a bunch of coupons? It's wasn't a problem because the product wasn't at full scale. Now, the Premier being out for so long and then renewed interest by changing the name and a fresh coat of paint, it becomes a problem. And now they're floating the idea, which means I would bet money they're going to do it at some point. It's just when, probably, if you go a year from the launch, close to the next year when it's time for people to renew, it's probably when they do it. But again, same concept holds true. Someone who I love, I know not many do, Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, you're talking about tanking. No one tanked harder than Wells Fargo. They tore down everything. They even had a successful card in the Propel, tore it down. They went the opposite way. The last folks we talked about, I know Citi has the double cash, right? But the other two, the big two banks, Chase and Bank of America, a 1.5x card. Wells Fargo goes the opposite way on their rebuild. They take the cash wise, it was yellow, turn it into the active cash with 2% card. That's like the grayish red one. And they also did something unprecedented at the time, business card, 2% on everything. No one else has a business card with 2% on everything. Chase, you have to pay like $200 to get a product like that. American Express has them, but they're capped at $50,000 each, or to get unlimited, you've got to pay like $250 or something for the graphite. So they're on their way back up. Again, my feelings on the Journey and their autograph. I have both. Interestingly enough, to stick with this, you have PNC now coming out of nowhere with their own version of preferred rewards. I think it's PNC Total Rewards, which is essentially the same thing as Bank of America, but the tiers are significantly lower at the top end. At the 100,000 tier, they're 2% card. They do have a 2% card. It took them a while to make a 2% card, but they have one. You get 2.5 with 100,000 with them, and if you had 500,000 with them, you get 2.7, which beats Bank of America, especially when we just went over it. Now to get 2.6, you've got to get to $1 million. Their gas card goes up to 5.4 if you were $500,000 as well, I want to say. So very interesting, but now we're seeing someone like, I'm bouncing teams or bouncing leagues here, but now it's more like, my own Detroit Pistons here, who are through the draft and trades, we finally got a competitive team. I think they were the 1 seed in the playoffs this year as well. So what is the takeaway from all this as I look at this? Well, I don't think anything's going to change at the top. I don't think Chase is going to compete much anymore. We look through their product line, it's fairly established. 10 years ago, they were more competitive than they are now, but they had to be. Now they have the user base, and I don't see them competing anytime soon unless someone steps up and challenges them significantly. And I don't know what's going to happen, because even if you take it out of our space, we don't include American Express in this because American Express doesn't really take banking seriously. But I still think if I'm Chase, I want all of your money, not just credit cards, where Amex just wants your credit cards and your payments. And we kind of have a bank maybe, but now we're concerned. But the others, the farther down you go, there is some life and some competitives. I would say, again, Wells Fargo on the upward trajectory, so competitive there. PNC, I'm considering moving over there as well, as much as I love also love PNC, said with tons and tons of sarcasm. And so the thing I come away with this thinking is we should probably just let it go from the standpoint of Chase being competitive, and we should simply move around and look for those up-and-coming spots, which granted is a little bit easier to do if you're cash back or you're going through their ecosystems. If you're tied to a points currency like Sky Miles or United Miles or Hyatt Miles, then you're probably stuck. As sad as it is to say, I mean, I don't know how hard it is or how much you love Hilton versus Marriott or something like that, but it's definitely trickier for travel. But when you're talking cash back, you definitely have, the common points currency is cash, so you can move around as your heart desires or as competition shows up. And so I don't necessarily want to go to PNC, but at the same time, well, if Bank of America is going to take a step back and PNC is going to step up and compete, well, we moved to US Bank for like 6-8 months when that came up. So I should probably move some to PNC, at least get to, I can't get to $500,000, but I can get to 100,000 through retirement accounts and get a 2.5x card over what will soon for me be a 2.25% card. Why not reward said competition? Additionally, I think we still can look around for up-and-coming products, if not on a bank level, but on an individual. I would say PNC is the greatest example we're using, as they're also the most recent. It's harder sometimes to find gems. I used to do a bunch of videos on smaller banks and credit cards looking to find gems. The best example here is the AAA line, the Daily Advantage or the Travel Advantage. 2 free cards that have no business being that good. 5% back on groceries, up to 10 grand in spend a year. There's other stuff on the card. Or the Travel Advantage is 5x on gas. I think up to like, it's a little bit lower. It's like $7,500 in spend a year, I want to say. But looking around and adding things like that, maybe getting away from the large-scale traditional banks who have no reason to compete. And it's wishful thinking, but if enough of us did that, then yes, maybe they would compete again. Probably not. I mean, to some degree, we moved to US Bank and like nothing really happened. So, maybe PNC has a chance, if enough people throw their weight behind it. So I don't have a plan in place yet to get over to PNC. It is something I continuously think about because, they are up and coming. The point of this video was competition. As you know, this has been said 1,000 times, competition generally good for the customer. I think we do just play a part in forcing competition. Granted, it's a little bit harder because we're talking about a really niche thing in one product line at a bank versus massive product lines. But again, I think they know credit cards matter, obviously from an income and fee perspective from them. But, each program we've seen, Bank of America, US Bank, and PNC, they've all at least had a credit card component. US Bank's basically only focused on the credit card. And so they know it matters, and we can tell it matters to them. Again, if you go back to Chase and what they've done and spent on the Sapphire line, of course, it matters to them as well. So all that to say, I think sometimes we are a little bit, just to say they're too big or ask why they won't compete is a little bit misleading, doesn't tell the whole story. That's my opinion is, yes, they don't have to, but it's also once you get that big, your product line is so mature, it's harder to compete, much like we don't really see that much diversification in phones anymore. In the beginning, it was a lot of cool stuff. They flip, they fold, they spin, all that. Now, not really. It's more about selling you the stuff underneath the software and the add-ons and that whole thing. So anyways, consider the options, look around. I'm going to consider PNC. I'm sure we'll do a whole video on it at some point as I try to make my way over there. Over the course of a year, I'm good. My preferred rewards is still in place until April of 27. So I don't necessarily think this is going to be a quick move, but you do have to start putting the pieces in place. So anyways, there you go. That is my thoughts on banking competition that we're seeing today and how we might be able to take advantage of it to a degree. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you planning to move anywhere? What products have caught your eye as of late? Of course, if you like this one, drop me a thumbs up down below. If you found it particularly interesting, consider subscribing to the channels. We're posting content just like this every single week. And of course, right back here every Sunday with all the news you can use the week that was in credit and finance. And of course, every single day over on profitablecontent.com, which is of course the channel's blog. Always linked down below for you and on the channel homepage with the latest news stories just like this, bank promotions, and credit card offers. Anyways, guys, that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you very soon in the next one.